Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by the following. Indiana University's Center for Applied Cybersecurity Research, presenting Security Matters with tips for improving online security in 3 minutes or less. And by WTIU members. Thank you.
Coming up on Indiana Newsdesk. The Supreme Court decides, and the impacts are already being felt in Indiana. The implications of the court's decision on same-sex marriage, and tens of thousands of Hoosiers can breathe easier after facing the threat of losing their health care subsidies.
If they would lose that, their premiums would go up about 271%.
Teens struggle to fit in and feel accepted. It's even more complicated for those who are dealing with issues related to gender identity. A new program gets teachers involved.
I have to reintroduce myself to new teachers and be like, no, my name's Isaac, not my birth name. And so they say, well, you don't look like an Isaac.
Plus the latest on the local food market. Blooming Foods faces a crisis because of increased competition. Ahead, we sit down one-on-one with the acting general manager to learn more about what's next. Those stories and the latest news headlines from across the state right now on Indiana Newsdesk. Welcome to Indiana Newsdesk. I'm Joe Wren. Same-sex couples now have the constitutional right to marry. The justices ruled today in a 5-4 decision that states cannot deny marriages to couples simply because they're gay. Our State House reporter Brandon Smith has been following this issue since same-sex marriage was first legalized in Indiana last year. That, of course, led to a number of legal challenges, which the Supreme Court tried to stay out of, but ultimately had to get involved, and that's led us to this landmark decision. Brandon, thanks for being here. In Indiana, same-sex marriage is legal. So what does this change in Indiana today?
Well, it essentially just maintains the status quo within Indiana. As you said, as of last October, same-sex marriage has been legal in this state. Today's ruling doesn't change that. However, it does mean that marriages in Indiana can now be recognized in all 50 states. And as one of the plaintiffs in that Indiana marriage suit, Pam Lee, said at a rally today, today's ruling means that she and her wife no longer have to worry about being torn apart in the future.
Brandon, you're there at the State House. What's the reaction there been like from state leaders?
Democratic leaders are unanimously celebrating today's ruling. That includes statements from the State House Democratic leaders, U.S. Senator Joe Donnelly, the state party Democratic gubernatorial candidates John Gregg and Glenda Ritz. Republicans have been a little less vocal. Republican U.S. Senator Dan Coates reiterated his support for so-called traditional marriage and the need to now defend religious freedom in the country. State Attorney General Greg Zeller urged respect for the decision, even from those who disagree with it. And Governor Mike Pence expressed his disappointment in the Supreme Court's ruling, but said that Indiana will abide by the law, and said that Hoosiers should be assured that the state will respect every Hoosier family.
159,000 Hoosiers will get to keep their health care subsidies after the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the subsidies in a ruling released yesterday. It's one of two major decisions the Supreme Court is making this month. The other is on same-sex marriage. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes. But first, what did the health care ruling decide, and what are the implications? The court was considering one line in the health care law that said subsidies would be available to an exchange established by the state. Some argue that meant health care subsidies should only be available to people in states that set up their own exchanges, not through the federal marketplace. Indiana was one of 34 states that did not set up a state-based exchange, so that meant 6.4 million people nationwide and 160,000 Hoosiers could have lost their health care subsidies. Healthcare experts say that would have skyrocketed healthcare premiums. The average subsidy in Indiana was more than $300. So if the subsidies had been struck down, monthly premiums could have tripled. Instead, Professor Kasali Simon says Indiana can continue to focus on getting people signed up for insurance.
The Supreme Court is taking a firm stance on saying we understand the intent of Congress was to stabilize insurance markets. That means that they're putting heavy weight on the fact that they understand the intent of Congress to have been to improve health insurance markets, and that without the subsidies, these are marketplaces that would not survive, would not be functioning well. And the reason is that without the subsidies, the uninsured are insured because they can't afford health insurance, and that at any price, the people who would buy health insurance are going to be the ones who need it the most, or are sicker, and that would cause premiums to rise.
Health insurance providers praised the decision. The Indianapolis-based company Anthem, the nation's largest for-profit health insurer, said yesterday it's pleased that the Supreme Court ruling maintains access to coverage for subsidy-eligible individuals across the country, and they look forward to continuing to play an integral role in expanding health care coverage for more Hoosiers. But Republicans were not pleased, saying the ruling gives credence to Obamacare. Governor Pence issued a statement that said the ruling is, quote, profoundly disappointing to me and every Hoosier who had hoped this ruling would give our nation the opportunity to start over on health care reform. He calls the court's order judicial activism that upholds a deeply flawed law to the detriment of millions of Hoosiers. Nevertheless, the court's ruling is the final word. There are a lot of moving parts in both of these cases, and there are sure to be consequences for years. So to talk about those, we're joined by two experts in these areas. Chris Schrader is a human resources professional, and Ryan Scott is a law professor at the IU Maurer School of Law. Ryan, let's start with you in the same-sex marriage case. Is this a decision that everybody was expecting?
It's the result that most people who are court watchers anticipated, but the rationale is somewhat surprising, and there's always a little bit of uncertainty around a landmark decision like this. It's a major victory for proponents of marriage equality for same-sex couples, and sparked strenuous dissents by all four justices in the dissent, wrote separate opinions to express their dissatisfaction with the outcome. So roughly what we expected, but perhaps a little bit different in its rationale and in the way that the consequences that the opinion will have going forward.
And it was close. It was 5-4. So what was the heart of that debate that made it that close?
The majority opinion written by Justice Kennedy expounds upon the due process clause of the 14th Amendment and adds to it an analysis of the equal protection clause. It's doctrinally, it's actually a little bit confusing, and a lot of people, even in the few hours since the opinion has come out, have criticized the rationale that Justice Kennedy uses, thinks that it's malleable and that it's going to be difficult for courts to apply going forward. It seems like the kind of rationale that only applies to this case and would be tough to expand in future cases. A very different rationale, for those of you who followed the Indiana case that the United States Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit decided about a year ago. That case was a more straightforward equal protection analysis. Justice Kennedy, as he sometimes does, chose a different path to get to that result.
So are both of you, Chris, surprised by the timing of these rulings?
I did not expect them to be one day after the other. I thought there might be a little bit more of a stagger, but clearly they wanted to get these out and get it done before the holiday.
What kind of impact does that same-sex ruling have on the health care issue?
On the health care issue, it will go more along the lines of health insurance. From a human resources perspective, we really don't get that involved in people's marital lives. But when it came down to things like 401k, life insurance, and medical insurance, there are specific rules that apply to a person's legal status as a spouse and how they are treated and the rights they have within those. So this clarifies that.
Now, there have been multiple lawsuits regarding the Affordable Care Act. We can go back to 2012.
Yes.
Does this Supreme Court ruling have any type of effect on the stability of health care now?
Well, yes and no. Probably more in the legal arena than in the fiscal arena and the legislative arena. I think this does put to rest main force legal challenges to it. It's pretty clear to me, at least, this court does not have appetite for overturning the ACA. And so this now firmly puts it into the legislative arena. But one thing is clear, and there was a big sigh of relief, I think, from a lot of the state exchanges in this regard. About half of them are struggling and financially underwater. 4 have thrown in the towel and are switching over to the federal exchange for next year's open enrollment. Another 5 have no path to the solvency required in the Act in 2016. So now there is a clear path to be able to easily retire those exchanges when and if they melt down and put them into the federal exchange without a lot of sturm and drang.
Ryan, do you agree?
Yeah, it's the decision certainly puts states in a position where they can more freely elect to create their own exchanges. If the court had come out the other way here, that would have put a lot of states, including Indiana, in a position where they need to either create an exchange of their own or hope that Congress stepped in and made changes that extended subsidies to others, regardless of the exchange. You heard Governor Pence's quote where he talked about starting over on health care reform. I do think that the folks who were disappointed in this ruling saw this as a chance to eliminate subsidies for a large group of people, not because they wanted that to be the resting point, the final result of the health care reform effort, but to use it as a bargaining chip in a new round of negotiations over what the health care plan would look like. So, for example, to eliminate the individual mandate or to make other changes to the Affordable Care Act that they've been proposing for a while. Instead, it's the status quo. The Obama administration gets a big win, and the health care law now will operate the same way regardless of whether the state or the federal government created the exchange.
15 seconds.
Yeah, ironically, it does create a strong disincentive to ever start another state exchange. I think how many you have here will just go downhill from there.
Okay, thank you both for being here today. Appreciate it. Now, for headlines, we go over to Lindsay Wright, who has the latest on this week's top stories.
Thank you, Joe. Former Governor Mitch Daniels testified this week before the U.S. Senate Finance Committee about the role of public-private partnerships in the funding of Hoosier state infrastructure. During his tenure as governor, Daniels leased the Indiana Toll Road to a private company for $3.8 billion for 75 years. The money fueled the Major Moves initiative, which funded new construction, including sections of Interstate 69 and improvements to state infrastructure. The committee's discussion focused on funding transportation improvements across the nation, and Daniel says he thinks private funding could be a key component of the search for infrastructure dollars.
I just submit that no answer will be complete without them. Without the involvement, the creative involvement of private financing, it's so ironic that this nation, which prides itself on being the world's innovation leader, is such a laggard in this area. And even a cursory look around the world will show you that we are trapped in old practices when the rest of the world has left them behind.
While the World Economic Forum's Global Competitiveness Report ranks the U.S.'s quality of roads 20th in the world. Well, Governor Mike Pence says Indiana will not comply with proposed Environmental Protection Agency regulations to reduce carbon dioxide emissions. In a letter to President Obama, Pence wrote the proposed rules are ill-conceived, and if not improved, Indiana will not comply. The EPA's proposed plan calls for a 20% reduction in carbon emissions by the year 2030. Pence says that would hurt Indiana's economy and its coal industry. Well, the families of hostages who have been killed by ISIS, including the family of Indianapolis native Peter Kassig, say they're grateful the U.S. is changing its hostage policy. This gives families more freedom to negotiate for their loved one's release. Kassig's parents repeatedly reached out to his captors on Twitter last year, asking what they could do to secure his release. And in doing so, the Kassigs could have been prosecuted under old U.S. policy. They say they appreciate that the government gave them the opportunity to voice their concerns. We have faith that the changes announced today will lead to increased success in bringing our citizens home, the Kassigs wrote earlier this week. When we see evidence of this occurring, it will further our healing. Well, 5 men are behind bars, charged with distributing the drugs linked to the HIV outbreak in southeastern Indiana that's infected 170 people. Indiana State Police arrested a man in Georgia who they say is the source of the drug supply and arrested the other men near Louisville earlier this month. The men are accused of distributing Opana, an opioid that people in the Scott County area have been taking intravenously, and health officials attribute the sharing of needles to the current HIV outbreak. The Terre Haute man facing charges for knowingly infecting women with HIV made his first court appearance earlier this week. Joe Wren brings us that story from the Vigo County Courthouse.
Isaiah Christopher Benford entered a plea of not guilty for 16 criminal counts, including battery by body waste and violation or failure of carrier's duty to warn. The 31-year-old is under investigation for knowingly having sexual relations with at least 4 female partners while failing to disclose that he has HIV.
It's one of the first that the prosecutor's office had. It's one of the first cases of such that we've had. It's not a common investigation that we do.
Benford is being held at the Vigo County Jail on a $100,000 bond. He's been incarcerated there on robbery charges since April of 2014. Benford's trial is scheduled for December 7th.
Well, none of Indiana's Amtrak stations are in compliance with disability standards. That's according to a U.S. Department of Justice investigation that revealed the stations had inaccessible parking, inadequate counter heights, and even refusal to sell tickets to customers with disabilities. In a statement, Amtrak said it serves as an important mode of travel for passengers with disabilities and is committed to improving services, facilities, and program management to ensure accessibility for all. And Joe, Amtrak is promising to continue to work with the Department of Justice to develop a plan that will address these concerns.
Okay, thank you very much, Lindsay. Coming up next on Indiana Newsdesk. The local food market is changing and a Bloomington institution faces an uncertain future. Coming up, we sit down with the general manager of Blooming Foods to find out more about how the co-op plans to regroup and survive growing competition. And teachers are getting a lesson in how to help students who are struggling with gender identity or sexual orientation. A look at a new program designed to make it easier for teachers and students to interact. These stories and more right here on Indiana Newsdesk.
Nature takes you places where you've never gone before.
It's watching something that's actually happened.
Nature sure draw me in the story.
Just their power and their grace.
You know, it was just so beautiful to watch them.
The movement and just watching the body and watching the chase.
Like this huge, lush, vibrant watercolor.
James.
There was such a shot of underneath watching these elephants swim in this deep water.
I had no idea even they could swim like that.
I saw one monkey pulling on this one monkey's tail, and the monkey like, man, what you doing? What you doing?
It's like the theater of the wild or something.
7 billion trillion animals living on one planet.
It's like more colorful than than you think life can possibly be.
Somewhere between the mystique and the beauty of it is reason enough to sit down and watch.
That's life. And that's nature.
Welcome back to Indiana Newsdesk. Last week we told you how Blooming Foods, the local grocery store in Bloomington, was restructuring after seeing a 20% drop in business. The company held a meeting this week to gather public input, and the acting Blooming Foods general manager says she's taking the public's response to heart as the company moves forward. We sat down with her to discuss what's next for Blooming Foods and its customers. So Monday night's meeting was packed, standing room only. What did that reveal to you that night, and what did you get from that night?
To me, it revealed that the community of Bloomington really cares about Blooming Foods, and it's an integral part of the community, and people are concerned. They want to know and they want to help.
Most of what I've heard about were more administrative type moves. Is that what's going to continue to happen, or are there other plans for some sort of maybe new marketing with the store?
This is sort of phase one. The opportunities in Bloomington are great, and I think the co-op serves serves the market very well. I think we can refine and change with the times. Just catching up with simple things that we didn't have to do 20 or 30 or 40 years ago.
And what are some of those things?
So we'll want to take advantage of more of the social media in terms of having discussions, having more information, having more communication available.
And with those members, besides just shopping, how do you keep them involved, or do you want to keep them involved in this process of change that's going to happen?
Member forums on a monthly basis to have dialogue with the members of the board that they've chosen as their representatives. Those are regularly scheduled. We will be sending out regular communication to members about the transition plan and what's happening with this. Blooming Foods has this opportunity to open the doors wide and talk with its members.
So what now? You just had the big meeting Monday. This is going to be, I assume, a long process. What can people expect to start happening now?
We'll kind of take it one step at a time. We'll communicate more frequently and more often. We'll update people, and our next big push is probably going to be for the annual meeting in October.
This is a trend, though, that's happening probably across the country. Are there other things that Blooming Foods can learn outside of Bloomington to bring that here to help in this situation?
We've noted that, it has slowed down the growth of some of our co-ops when competition comes to town and when there's more players, but it makes us better and it makes us focus on those core strengths we have. I think we will have embraced a lot of what co-ops across the country have learned as competition has come into their area. There is something unique the cooperative ownership structure offers.
So besides the surveys, is there anything else that the customers could see in the stores, maybe prices or other items?
Actually, we're working on pricing right now to be implemented the first week in July, so we're working hard on that as we speak. And looking at where we have opportunities to adjust our prices and serve our members better. So hopefully you're going to see happier staff, and you're going to see, staff are more in tune with what's going on and more informed. So I would hope that there would be more engagement with customers and staff. I think those are the big things.
The next public member owner forum will be in July. Navigating the emotions of adolescence is tough for most teenagers, but for students recognizing their sexual orientation or gender identity, the confusion can be intensified. As the students struggle to embrace this part of their life, teachers also struggle to understand the challenges LGBTQ students face. A group of young people in South Central Indiana recently received a grant to close that gap by creating a training program for teachers throughout Indiana. Clara McInerney of our State Impact Education team reports.
Going into more on the binary versus spectrum.
Every few months, the members of Prism Youth Community, an organization run through Bloomington Pride, host a community forum. The Prism Youth plan and host the events in an attempt to inform their community about the issues facing LGBTQ people. These teenagers find as they learn more about their own sexual orientation or gender identity, it helps to share this information with the adults in their lives so they can have honest conversations about their struggles. 16-year-old Isaac is all too familiar with these struggles as a transgender male who came out and began transitioning during high school. We're not using his last name because other transgender teenagers have been bullied on social media when they've spoken out. A year ago, before he came out, Isaac wanted to join the track team.
I went to the doctor because you have to get a physical before you join any sports team. And so at that physical, I asked my nurse practitioner what gender dysphoria was and if she could send me any resources.
That information catapulted Isaac into the realization he identifies as a transgender male. Soon after, he began his transition from female to male.
I was originally going to join the girls' track team, but after reading those, I decided I'm just gonna come out, and so after that, I decided not to join the boys' track team because it was just too much.
In addition to figuring out the right sports team to join, Isaac faces a lack of knowledge from teachers and other school staff that make it difficult for him to feel comfortable at school as he moves through his transition. For example, the school won't change his name on the roster.
And so I have to reintroduce myself to new teachers and be like, no, my name's Isaac, not my birth name. And so they say, well, you don't look like an Isaac.
Isaac is a part of Prism Youth Community, a group for LGBTQ youth from 7 counties in South Central Indiana. The group recently received a grant from the city of Bloomington to create free online resources for teachers and other youth-serving professionals across the state that will help them better understand LGBTQ issues and how to properly address them at school. The resources will be divided into online modules so teachers can access whatever information they need at that time. The modules will include information explaining different facets of gender and sexuality, but will also inform teachers about how to handle specific scenarios, like how to address a transgender student or ask questions that aren't offensive to students.
As someone who really believes in equality in all its forms, I have been struggling to understand a lot of it.
Sweeney says over the last few years, as more students have come out, she struggles with knowing how to be a helpful and effective educator for them.
Just things such as, should I refer to this young person as a boy or a girl? Should I use he or she? And I have been really trying to learn about how I can support these students and what to do about them.
By giving teachers more information, the students hope to reduce instances of using the wrong name or pronoun, not letting students use the bathroom they want, or assuming a student will attend a dance with a date of the opposite gender. PRISM's program director, Laura Ingram, says not only does a student's academic performance suffer if they feel unaccepted, it hinders them from experiencing an important part of the teenage years, developing their social skills.
I hate that they're missing out on things that maybe they really want to do, or their focus is elsewhere, rather than just kind of being kids. And so we want school to be safe for them. We want them to join clubs and have fun and go to dances and all of those things, and not have to worry about, is that something that they're going to get, made fun of for, or that the adults, they weren't going to advocate for them.
The group plans to have some of the online training done by the end of the summer so teachers can use it before the new school year.
The PRISM advisors and students say they will make themselves available if schools want on-site training in addition to the online modules. And kids got a chance to look at the history beneath the Monroe County Courthouse this week. Sifting through the dirt beneath the Monroe County Courthouse, children found fragments of wood, brick, and glass in the soil, remnants of what the site looked like in the 18th century. The courthouse square used to be the home to the first police station, the first city fire department, and the county's first library, in addition to 3 different courthouses.
The pottery and the container glass, what would that be from? I think it's picnics on the lawn.
The excavation on the courthouse lawn is part of the county's plan to install a Women in Government plaza and limestone benches in memory of a former county council member. Well, that's the end of this program, but our work continues online as we cover the news throughout the week at WTIUnews.org. Have a great weekend.
Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by the following. Indiana University's Center for Applied Cybersecurity Research, presenting Security Matters with tips for improving online security in 3 minutes or less. And by WTIU members. Thank you.